Hi, everyone, and welcome to week 2 for English 207, spring 2021. I'm going to share my screen and talk through what we're going to be discussing this week, which is basically creativity and writer's block, and a quick introduction to how we're going to be using the textbooks. I'll share my screen. Okay, so this week I want to focus on creativity and writer's block. They are the two things that are the most common when it comes to writers, especially creative writing. You have to have some spark of creativity or some drive to write. And that's why we're here in this class. For the most part, we're here because we enjoy writing and we want to get better. We want to keep writing. However, along with that creativity comes writer's block, which is all of the things that get in our way when it comes to writing. Our week this week is going. All work this week is going to be focused on those aspects of writing, both creativity and those things that get in our way. And then next week we'll start more into practices of specific genres of writing. So when we talk about writing, let's talk about what you have to have. I'm sure we've all heard this person's a good writer, this person's a bad writer, I don't like that person's writing. And usually we think what we're referring to is talent. But talent is only a small part of the package. I think about writers like, to use an example, off the top of my head example, George R.R. Martin, who writes the Song of Ice and Fire series that the Game of Thrones television series is based on. He has a lot of talent and his books are beautiful, but they don't come out very often, and he may never finish his series. So there are books out there that are never going to be read. Then we have other authors like Stephen King, who has a book that comes out. I feel like he's got a new book every year, if not more often. This doesn't mean that Stephen King is more talented than George R.R. Martin. What it means is that he just has a more consistent writing practice. So I want to get beyond that idea of I have talent, I don't have talent. Talent is not what makes or breaks a writer. What does are these things: creativity, practice, drive, desire, and again, practice. It's on there twice for a reason. It's not a typo. Creativity is that spark that we have. We look around the world and we see things differently, whether we are talking about poetry, fiction, or nonfiction. We want to tell stories. We have this drive, this innate desire to share some aspect of our experiences of the world with others. And you have to have that desire to write, that desire to tell stories, and you have to have that creative spark to really push your writing. However, drive, or the oomph to sit down and write, is super important, and practice. When I was in grad school, one of the questions we talked about every semester when I worked with a different mentor was, describe your writing practice. And often I would say, I don't know, I just kind of write when the spark hits. And I did that for a very long time. What I didn't realize was that that wasn't all that I was doing. I also needed that deadline, that I knew I had to have some writing into my mentor in, I don't know, 3 weeks. So I had that drive forced on me to meet that deadline. Once I graduated and I no longer had that deadline, that forced drive, I had to start learning how to create my own drive. And sometimes I'm more successful than others. But I do try to sit down and make myself write or practice at least once a week, if not more often. And one of my goals this semester is to write along with you all. So when you all have a writing prompt, I'm going to be writing along with that same prompt. But what happens when the writing words won't come? Sometimes it's hard. So one of my favorite television series is Supernatural. If you've had me in a class before, you know this. And in season 4, we're introduced to the character Chuck Shirley, who we think at the time is a prophet, and we find out later he's a much bigger deal than a prophet. Um, but he's writing these books that are summing up the lives of the main characters of the series, and they confront him after discovering these books. And they're like, "We think you're psychic." And Chuck says, "If I were psychic, you think I'd be writing? Writing is hard." And I've never fallen more in love with a character than I did with him in that moment, um, which led me to being a super fan and going to conventions. And I actually took the picture of the author, sorry, the actor who plays Chuck at a convention in Chicago 2 years ago now. That's on this screen. But anyway, what he's talking about isn't necessarily learning how to write. Yeah, that's difficult and it takes a lot of work, but that's not the hard part about writing. Writing is hard because of everything else outside that we put on top of writing. Things like writer's block and writing anxiety, when you're sitting down and you're looking at your screen or you're looking at your keyboard or your notebook, and it just feels like the words aren't there. One of the things that I've said and I've seen in a lot of week 1 assessments from students in various classes is this idea that is this fear or frustration of having the words that we want to write in our heads, but they don't show up on the screen or on the keyboard or on the page. Sometimes we are stressed and we want to write about that stress, or we're stressed because it's like this feels wrong. I want to write this story, or I want to write this essay, or I have this poem in my head, but it's just not right. Or it's this idea that you're writing and you're when you're writing you really love it and it feels good, and then you realize that's only half my job. Writing is a transaction. Putting it on the page is the first part. Sharing it with an audience is the second part, that transaction, giving it to an audience and getting their response back. And when you start having, then all of a sudden this fear comes on you of, well, what if they don't understand it? What if they don't like it? What if they think I'm a bad writer? What if they don't understand why I'm writing about this? Those kinds of things. And the first thing I want to tell you is that you're normal if you have those fears. And honestly, when it comes to whether you're a good writer or not, those things are healthy. As much as it sounds as backwards as it sounds, I've never met a good writer who understood that they were a good writer off the bat. Um, or I've met a couple, but even so, they still have this fear of judgment or this insecurity or this anxiety about their writing. And what that comes from is because you care about what you're doing. If you didn't care about the writing, you wouldn't be anxious about what other people would think of it because you don't care about it. If you care enough about your work, there's going to be some anxiety along with that. And you're not alone there. Overcoming it, those things, it's as easy and as hard as just getting the words on the page, or setting up a writing practice. The good thing for you all this semester is that you have deadlines. You have to have things in at certain times. So that'll give you some of that drive. Um, and you have a deadline every week, so you can set up your writing practice. When do I have time during the week where I can sit down and write? Do you want to give a few minutes every day? Do you want to take 2 days out of the week to make yourself write? That's up to you. Um, a lot of writers will say that you should just schedule yourself in the planner like you schedule your classes. That's something that I'm trying to do that I struggle with a little bit. I'm also ADHD, so I struggle a little bit with scheduling anyway. But I am trying to remember that my writing is every bit as important as other things that I want to do. Sometimes it feels like spending time writing is a luxury. And I know that it is, especially we have work. I mean, there's everything else going on in the world. But remember that your writing is important too, and you're important. So give yourself that time. and being willing to forgive yourself. You may have a week where the words don't come. You may have a time where you're like, this is my practice, and then something else happens and interrupts your practice. And it's easy to just get frustrated and angry at yourself anytime that your practice is interrupted. But understand that it's okay. It's okay if all you write during practice is, I can't flipping write right now, or these words won't come. That's okay. More than anything, these are two quotes by one of my favorite writers and a dear friend of mine, Claudia Love Meyer, who has written some Christian fiction, and then she wrote a memoir that's absolutely beautiful called Don't You Fall Now. But two of the things that she's told me about writing and life is, the first thing is that you don't should on yourself. Don't worry about, I should have written this better. I should have started writing this story a long time ago. I should have spent time working on my poem instead of playing a video game or whatever. If you had to spend time playing a video game, maybe what your brain needed in that moment was just to play a video game. But also, it's this idea that you can't change the past. And by worrying about the shoulds, I should have done this, I should not have done that, you're just punishing yourself for something you can't control. And the other thing is, you have to give yourself permission to suck. Think of writing as practice and as an apprenticeship. You have to start somewhere at the beginning before you can improve. You may write beautiful fiction but struggle with poetry. You may write beautiful poems but really struggle with nonfiction. That's why we're looking at all three genres. Which one of those seems to make the most sense to you? Give yourself permission to try new things, to play with words, to play with language, to play with format and structure. Figure out what you enjoy and be willing to try things that you wind up not enjoying. That's okay. This week, I want us to focus on getting used to the textbooks. We're going to focus on creativity, understanding the why and how of writing when it relates to ourselves, and spend some time on the things that tend to get in our way. And then next week, we'll get started with more specific structured writing and genre writing. We'll start with fiction, and then we'll move on from there. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know. And I look forward to hearing from you and reading your writing this week.